capitalist system requires rules. But the rules increasingly are shaped by very wealthy people.
Americans are divided over whether or not the United States is descending into an oligarchy.
What we are seeing now is an uber capitalism in which just a handful of people are exercising far, far, far too much power.
When people say America functions as an oligarchy, I always wonder if they would have this complaint if the people who they thought were shaping policy behind the scenes agreed with them.
And after the last presidential election, tensions over wealth, power, and democracy have only heightened.
The ultimate sort of rub it in our faces moment was at the inauguration, where that row of oligarchs was seated in front of our elected congressional representatives. That's never happened before.
An oligarchy insinuates political power. I think it's an open question how much power these tech leaders have.
Doge insisted on God-tier access to the data at my agency, data that no other company on Earth has access to.
Is America in a new Gilded Age?
We've really never been at a moment like this where wealthy people had so much power over our government since the Gilded Age.
I don't think that we're in another Gilded Age. I'm more concerned about the economy slowing down.
Or is this just the latest chapter in the nation's struggle to balance power and prosperity?
We all need to work together, the private sector and governments together to solve problems. I don't think one can solve them over the other.
The kinds of fortunes we're talking about right now are staggering. They're unprecedented in history. When you consider the fortunes of the tech leaders, they are so extraordinary, it is really hard to get your head around them.
Brad Stone has spent 2 decades chronicling the rise of Silicon Valley and has interviewed many of its top tycoons.
They wouldn't, even if they wanted to, be able to give it all away in their lifetimes. Elon Musk is worth almost $400 billion. Jeff Bezos is worth about $200 billion. He owns the largest sailing yacht in the world. Mark Zuckerberg lives in the Bay Area, but has estates in Tahoe and in Hawaii. This is wealth at an extraordinary scale. These fortunes actually grow at a faster rate than they could even possibly hope to give away.
It's very hard for the average person to envision $1 billion. I mean, $1 billion is $1,000 million.
Robert Reich is a professor of public policy at UC Berkeley and a former Secretary of Labor under President Clinton.
It's very hard for people to make sense of these figures because they're so far beyond the 60,000, 80,000 that most people live on.
Making the effort to be here today.
Some of America's leaders say the staggering wealth and influence it affords represents a threat to democracy, and they're sounding the alarm.
The American people do not want the richest guy on earth running all over Washington, D.C.
In February 2025, Senator Bernie Sanders and others began the Fighting Oligarchy Tour, holding rallies around the country to push back against what he argues is a corrupting influence of billionaires on U.S. politics. We met up with Senator Sanders at a stop in Los Angeles after Elon Musk spoke to reporters from the Oval Office.
The people voted for major government reform, and that's what people are going to get. They're going to get what they voted for.
What's the difference between powerful people having influence versus a straight-up oligarchy?
An oligarchy you can look at as an economic reality. But with a guy like Musk and others, it's not just economic power, it is political power. He is helped by the presidency for Trump, so it's economic plus political.
When we exercise our power, the people united will never, ever be defeated.
We're having an economic situation where the rich seem to get richer and the poor seem to get poorer. And there's a great deal of uneasiness that the United States is losing its democratic tendencies.
Stanford University professor and Gilded Age historian Richard White says he sees a lot of parallels between today's economy and politics and those of the Gilded Age.
The Gilded Age was a period in American history that stretched from roughly 1870 into the early 20th century. And it's called the Gilded Age because it's a period in which beneath the surface prosperity were real social problems, real economic problems, real health problems, and what people regarded as a kind of political rot that was hidden by the glistening surface. It was a period of much larger immigration than other periods in American history. It was becoming a much more diverse country, trying to assimilate ex-slaves into the fabric of the nation as citizens. It was a nation undergoing as profound a change as you will find in American history.
The U.S. was expanding rapidly. Tens of thousands of miles of railroad were being laid across the country. Oil was being refined to light America's growing homes and businesses. And financing this explosive rise created a boon for banking. Tycoons like Andrew Carnegie, John D. Rockefeller, and J.P. Morgan were at the helm of corporations driving expansion, and as a result became immensely wealthy. By 1890, the top 1% of the U.S. population owned 51% of the country's wealth. That share had decreased to 22% by 1990, before growing once again. Today, 30% of U.S. wealth is owned by the top 1%.
What has happened in the country is that over the last 60 years, there was a real backlash against taxation.
Andrea Bernstein is an investigative journalist and author of American Oligarchs, The Kushners, The Trumps, and the Marriage of Money and Power.
It became easier and easier for the wealthy people to keep more of their money. Well, what are you going to do if you're wealthy and you have a lot of money? You're going to put some of that into the political system to try to influence outcomes so that you can hang on to even more of your money. That is the way the system works.
I don't think that we're in another Gilded Age. I'm more concerned about the economy slowing down.
Jason Riley is a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute, a conservative think tank, and a columnist for the Wall Street Journal.
Because of issues such as the way the current administration, the Trump administration, is handling trade, handling legal immigration, I think we're probably more likely have a labor shortage in this country. And so when I look at what deporting hundreds of thousands of people might do with respect to filling jobs in this country, it concerns me. We have tens of thousands of manufacturing jobs right now with no one to fill them.
If by Gilded Age, you mean, are we in a time right now when there's an unprecedented amount of extreme wealth and also a lot of technological innovation that's led to massive gains in productivity, then yeah, it's similar to the Gilded Age in that way.
Jessica Flanigan is a professor at the University of Richmond and co-author of an essay titled Wealth Without Limits in Defense of Billionaires.
When we see a lot of economic growth, it's because people have found ways to deliver new goods and services in an innovative way where they can deliver it more efficiently to more people at a lower price. And those types of innovations generally benefit workers, both through having more purchasing power, their dollar goes a little bit further because they're in this innovative new economy, and having a competitive economy in a growing economy means that there's more jobs for people.
When are you going to add another banner up there?
I hope soon.
David Edelman is an entrepreneur and part owner of the Philadelphia 76ers and the New Jersey Devils.
I talked to other guys in the league, and not everyone is involved with their team in their hometown. So for me, this is like a dream come true.
When he was a teenager, Edelman says he invested $2,000 he was gifted for his bar mitzvah into real estate, and in his 20s built a college housing empire. Today, his net worth is over $2 billion, and his companies employ approximately 1,000 people around the country.
I don't know when in life the word millionaire or billionaire became a bad word.
Do you think we're living in an American oligarchy?
I don't see it that way. I think that people like to create a narrative like that, and I think it's really divisive. To me, like, we all need to work together. And I think that, Again, it happens when the private sector and government comes together to solve problems. I don't think one can solve them over the other, right? And so getting people to work, creating jobs, that job creation. My partners and I are going to build a new arena in Philadelphia for the 76ers and the Philadelphia Flyers. That is going to employ 9,000 construction workers.
Some argue that successful entrepreneurs and business leaders, whether it's in Silicon Valley or elsewhere, are the primary drivers of innovation, that they are willing to take risks that government cannot take. Do you agree?
I do.
Why?
I can't speak for other people, but I think one of the reasons why I've had some success is I'm not afraid to fail. I have the ability during different phases of my career to make certain bets or put more chips in on a certain asset or deal, understanding that, the outcome might hurt me, might hurt my family, it might hurt our employees, but it also might, reward all of them.
So you're able to take more bets and able to be more aggressive when it comes to actually changing things.
Government's job is to provide, infrastructure, social services, safety services, things like that, but then let the people make the bets.
In this age of computers and the information superhighway, the technology is moving so fast, the law sometimes has to struggle to keep up.
In the mid-1990s, the internet as we know it was still in its infancy.
If you were to print the Amazon.com catalog, it would be the size of 7 New York City phone books.
There were only around 20 million users in America.
What's our email address, Al? Do you know that?
It wasn't just a lack of regulation that helped to mint these enormously profitable companies and these wealthy individuals.
House and Senate negotiators met today to consider a massive overhaul of telecommunications rules in this country.
There was a conscious decision by policymakers starting in the 1990s to not regulate this nascent industry.
It means that the average American is going to benefit. Small business is going to be able to get in. We're going to have a pro-competitive environment, an explosion of new devices, and a new era.
That's the promise. Consumer watchdog groups say, here's the reality.
Rather than getting more competition, consumers are likely to see consolidation in the market, fewer choices, and higher rates.
Critics predict a handful of big corporations will gain control of the new communications world.
You could view it as almost a great wave propelling all these companies forward.
The Telecom Act was a good step, but it was almost isolated. And really the opportunity that was missed is what else could have been pulled back.
Kent Lassman runs the Competitive Enterprise Institute, a libertarian think tank.
There were tremendous opportunities to peel back 20th century restrictions. So the way these companies organized, how they worked together or did not work together, how they employed people.
The consequence of that deregulation was similar to the lack of regulation in the period from the 1870s to the 1890s or the early 1900s in oil and steel and railroads and banking.
Tom Hartman is the author of The Hidden History of American Oligarchy.
You ended up with massive consolidation. You see this in industry after industry after industry.
The Federal Trade Commission is suing the world's largest online retailer.
The tech company, which owns Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp, is being sued over allegedly creating an illegal monopoly.
The federal antitrust cases against Amazon and Meta are ongoing. Both companies deny the allegations.
It's not always wrong for the government to interfere in the economy to try to induce innovation or to promote social benefits in some way. But it's often wrong because it's very rarely the case that public officials know what's better for people as consumers than the people know about themselves.
Mark Zuckerberg is a pioneer of the current wave of social media computing. Zuckerberg has been absolutely relentless in acquiring new properties. It is really a credit to Zuckerberg's almost ruthlessness in constantly evolving Facebook, now called Meta, to keep up with its users' tastes, which is why he's now the second or the third richest person in the world.
In 2020, following a 16-month investigation, a majority of the House Judiciary Committee said that Facebook, Google, Amazon, and Apple had turned from scrappy startups into the kinds of monopolies we last saw in the era of oil barons and railroad tycoons. Like the most successful monopolist of the Gilded Age, John D. Rockefeller, whose Standard Oil Trust swallowed up competitors on its way to dominating the global oil market.
As Rockefeller later describes it, he's after organization. He doesn't believe in competition. And as he sees it, he has no patience with people who think that the United States should be a competitive economy. He says that's nonsense. His ability to drive out competitors into any market he goes into is the mark of what he does. It's the mark of Standard Oil.
There's this disconnect between the beliefs of the oligarchs and what actually happened to make them prosperous.
Dartmouth sociology professor Brooke Harrington coined the term broligarchs to describe many Silicon Valley tycoons.
When does a wealthy person cross the line from wealthy, successful, a positive influence on society to broligarch?
When they decide that they get to keep all the money and that they're not going to pay any of their fair share of the costs of the society that made them prosperous. Elon Musk's businesses were bailed out repeatedly by taxpayer-funded subsidies and tax breaks. The people who created Google were recipients of a National Science Foundation grant. The entire world of e-commerce was based on a taxpayer-funded communication system that became the World Wide Web.
These social media platforms that have these tech titans in charge of them have become very wealthy, those tech titans. But also a lot of small businesses have started on these social media platforms. People have individually used them to increase their own wealth as well. So I don't see this as a zero-sum game.
It does consistently surprise me that people want to focus on this. I think it's actually the politics of envy, as opposed to the politics of creation and innovation and doing something positive with your resources.
One way to break up power is antitrust law. You break up big companies. That's what is now being considered with regard to Amazon and Google and other huge companies that may not need to be that big to do the good things they do, but may need to be broken up to avoid the bad things they do.
And the Washington Post is marking the end of an era. The Graham family, which has owned the Post for 4 generations, has agreed to sell the newspaper. The buyer is Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon.com.
The deal is done. Twitter has been sold to Elon Musk. The Tesla and SpaceX CEO acquired the social media company for roughly $44 billion.
Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg announced major changes today, including an end to the platform's fact-checking program, relying on users instead.
One of the real dangers of great concentrated wealth is that not only does it exert influence politically, but it also exerts influence through its ownership of the media. These people have, and they know they have, the power to influence how the public sees reality.
During the Gilded Age, the ultra-wealthy could buy almost anything, and one prize for many was the means to influence public opinion.
In the 19th century, what the person who owns the paper wants is what the paper is going to print. Any single newspaper, you're not getting the news, you're getting the interest of the person who in fact controls that paper.
In 1879, at the dawn of the Gilded Age, there were just over 5,000 newspapers in circulation. By 1900, while America's population grew by 50%, the number of newspapers increased 400% to over 20,000.
Today's corporate media is far less competition and much easier to control. You can count on literally probably both hands the number of people who control the media.
Owning a media company has always been viewed as an accessory for the very powerful, and this generation of tech leaders is no different. I think Bezos bought the Washington Post in 2013, thinking that he was performing a public service.
I didn't seek to buy the Washington Post. I've known Don Graham for many years. Don thought that, because the newspaper business is being so disrupted by the internet, that somebody who had a lot of internet knowledge and technology knowledge could actually be very helpful.
And you believe that?
To the Post. I eventually came to believe that after having multiple conversations with Don.
Owning the Washington Post put Bezos in the crosshairs of Donald Trump during his first administration. This is a transactional president who doesn't see these fine distinctions, and he really did blame Jeff Bezos for the news articles that the Washington Post publish. And so now we've seen Bezos try to take a little bit more of a firmer hand in dictating, for example, what the Washington Post opinion page publishes.
Examples of Bezos' firmer hand have included blocking the Post editorial board's long-held tradition of making political endorsements and revamping the paper's opinion section to support and defend personal liberties and free markets.
I mean, some of these institutions wouldn't survive without sponsorship or ownership from a billionaire. It's a double-edged sword, having the comfort and protection of ownership from a wealthy individual, but at the same time, maybe being a little bit exposed to their relationship with political leaders and their particular views on how the media company should be run.
But newspapers aren't the only or even the most influential media platforms in the modern era. Often, social media platforms are faster and farther reaching than legacy media.
If you're under 40 or 50, odds are you're getting at least a third to maybe as much as a half of your news from social media. And it's shaping people's opinions. We're definitely seeing this in people under 30.
With Facebook, Instagram, and Threads, Mark Zuckerberg's Meta has 3.4 billion active users. And in buying Twitter and rebranding it as X, Elon Musk's platform has around 600 million monthly active users.
I think Elon Musk believed that he was rescuing Twitter and putting it on firm footing, pivoting it back towards what he viewed as freedom of speech.
Having a public platform that is maximally trusted and broadly inclusive is extremely important to the future of civilization.
Buying Twitter, turning that into a venue for his beliefs in free speech and his support of President Donald Trump.
Despite Musk's aim to build a new digital town square where he says a wide range of beliefs can be debated in a healthy manner, the effects of his ownership of X have not been equally felt across the political spectrum. A recent survey from Pew Research found that 51% of Republican users described their experience on X as positive. Only 20% of Democratic users feel the same. Since taking over the social media platform and amassing more than 220 million followers, Musk has had enormous influence on the tenor, tone, and focus of discourse on X.
If one person has a huge amount of free speech and that can drown out everybody else because they have a gigantic megaphone, that's not free speech because it's dependent on other people not being heard.
There's other kinds of speech that would be really influential, like endorsement from someone like Taylor Swift, the endorsement of the New York Times or Wall Street Journal editorial page. And I don't hear anybody saying, oh no, we should also prohibit rich celebrities and entertainment figures from endorsing political candidates because they'll have so much influence.
Mark Twain, who coined the term the Gilded Age, once said, "We have the best government money can buy." And it was no secret that the robber barons tried to buy the government.
It is probably the most corrupt era in the United States until now. The bribes are exchanged. I've even gone through the archives and some of the congressmen's records, and you find receipts. These guys are writing out receipts for bribes that they received.
But the Gilded Age wealthy business leaders organized themselves and created something that continues today.
So they're going to need influence in Congress, and they're the people who invent the modern lobby.
Lobbying is now a billion-dollar industry, and between 2020 and 2024, one law proposing to regulate social media companies had wide support.
A bipartisan group of members of Congress and parent advocacy groups and even tech companies, even Elon Musk, who owns X, are now asking lawmakers to pass something called the Kids Online Safety Act.
The bill would require tech platforms to prevent harm to minors. It passed by a large margin in an otherwise polarized Senate. Some tech companies lobbied, spending a collective $250 million to defeat the bill in the House. They were so successful that the bill died before getting a vote on the floor.
There are now almost 700 billionaires. Many of them have been getting more and more involved in politics. They're making deals. They are providing legalized bribes. They're getting changes in rules and laws.
And one of the biggest changes to campaign finance law occurred in 2010, the Citizens United case.
The justices will hear arguments in a major case, one that could lift the legal limits on campaign spending by corporations and unions.
The Supreme Court decision opened the door for corporations, unions, and billionaires to spend as much money as they want to influence candidates and elections.
Last week, the Supreme Court reversed a century of law that I believe will open the floodgates for special interests, including foreign corporations, to spend without limit in our elections.
And if you look at campaign spending over time from, say, 1900 to today, you see this kind of relatively flat line, the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, and then hit 2010, and suddenly it just goes like this. Several cycles ago, the first $1 billion election, and then it went to the $2 billion and the $4 billion. People just look at this and think, why even bother anymore? I'm not a billionaire. My vote doesn't count.
Sometimes people will be critical of the influence of money in politics because they'll say, money's not speech, but the thing that they're paying the money for is speech. Campaign finance is a form of speech because it's a way for people to pay to get their message to more ears or more eyeballs.
So you could say that capitalists have an undue influence. What about labor unions, teachers unions? And so you think about the collective organization. I think you can't just talk about one versus the other. Should people be able to come together and pool their influence and pool what they think is in their best interest? I don't think that's a crime. I think that's actually why how you vote. You pick candidates that represent your values, your morals, your family's interests, or your business interests.
Successful people, by definition, you own a company, you have power. Nothing new about that. But what we are seeing now is an uber capitalism, an out-of-control capitalism, in which just a handful of people are exercising far, far, far too much power. You get one vote. I get one vote. Elon Musk spends $270 million to elect Trump. Does that sound like democracy to you?
This is what victory feels like. Yeah!
Political spending is speech, free speech, protected by the First Amendment of the Constitution. And people want to spend their money on politics, they can. Are people on the left complaining that other wealthy individuals decide to spend their money on electing people who want to go soft on criminals that are raising hell in low-income communities? If you're spending your money a certain way, you're okay. If you're spending it on free market ideas and principles, if you want lower taxes, if you want smaller government, and so forth, somehow you are villainous.
In the 2024 election, more than 80 billionaires donated to then Vice President Kamala Harris's campaign, while just over 50 billionaires donated to President Donald Trump's camp.
And with the second Trump administration, there is a promise of a transactional president, and the closer you get to him, the easier things will go for you. And so I think that's why we saw Bezos and Zuckerberg and, of course, Elon during the campaign really cozy up to Trump.
And with the election of Trump, these billionaires had a literal front row seat to the new administration.
Jeff Bezos, shortly after Trump was elected, decided that he was going to do a documentary about Melania Trump and paid sort of 3 times the going rate, most of which just goes straight to the Trump family. There have been settlements. There was a settlement by Meta with Trump where they're giving tens of millions of dollars.
If you're worried about any of those kinds of influence for public officials, it's because you're worried that the people that you're voting for are not going to be reliable stewards of the public interest, because they're being influenced unduly by these extraneous factors, and that's a reason to limit the power of what public officials can do.
The Gilded Age sets the stage for campaign finance laws because there's a reform that takes place. And those work pretty well until the very recent past, in which Supreme Court decisions have overturned them.
Historians will look back on this era and wonder, how is it possible that the richest man in the world gained so much power over the rules of the game? Well, the answer is that the richest man in the world invested about $250 million getting the presidency for Donald Trump.
My administration will establish the brand new Department of Government Efficiency.
The executive branch houses more than 20 agencies, employing hundreds of thousands of workers, addressing almost every facet of American life. Immediately after he won a second term, President Donald Trump turned over the keys of this vast federal bureaucracy to the world's richest man.
Elon's role in the Trump administration is totally unprecedented and frankly does feel like it's treading on historical norms to have a business leader with lots of interest in front of the federal government, to have a large campaign donor, maybe the largest campaign donor in U.S. election history, to be so close to power.
What was it like for you when you first heard Elon Musk, he's going to come in, he's going to run the Department of Government Efficiency?
I thought, great, more people who want to show up and fix things.
I was actually cautiously optimistic. I thought that what we were doing wasn't far enough or good enough in meeting people's needs.
At the beginning of the second Trump administration, Maurice Vinton and Erie Meyer knew better than anyone the challenges that come with moving fast and breaking things inside the federal government. Vinton worked for the U.S. Digital Service, a White House office responsible for building new technology products across the federal government. Meyer helped launch the service in 2014 under President Obama.
The afternoon of inauguration, President Trump signed an executive order that established the U.S. Doge service. And then that night, we started receiving meeting invites to meet our new Doge colleagues the following day. For your initial introductory conversation, it was both not really what you'd expect, and also it was clear that they really didn't know what we did or the type of work that we were there to do.
CBS News obtained an audio recording of one of these meetings.
Before we start, do you mind just giving us, like your first and last name? I don't even know you, I'm sorry. Can you share your first and last name? And, yeah.
Sure, it's but we were told this is supposed to be a one-way interview.
Okay.
So we're not supposed to just go into detail.
Felt like a loyalty test. What is your opinion of Doge? And then also, who's your favorite teammate or who would you fire?
What happened next came straight from the Musk playbook. Just as he did at Twitter, Doge began purging staff at agency after agency, employing a mix of voluntary resignations and mass firings in an effort to reduce labor costs in what the administration says are waste, fraud, and abuse.
This is the chainsaw for bureaucracy.
Country overspends, country goes bankrupt. Same as the person who overspends goes bankrupt. So it's not like optional to solve these things, it's essential.
It became completely absurd. The richest man in the world is now showing up, sleeping on the floor of a government agency.
While 43 of Vinton's teammates were fired, she was allowed to keep her job. It was tax season, and she was detailed to the IRS, leading a team building a website that Americans could use to file their taxes for free. She says Gavin Kleiger, a 25-year-old member of Musk's team, showed up, demanding access to the personal data Americans share with the IRS when they fill out their tax returns.
Including systems that would be able to say, where you could actually edit it, and you could actually go in and zero out your own tax liability, or zero out or increase your competitor's tax liability. And IRS employees would say, that's not That's not legal. We don't have permission to do that. It's not in statute. And at one point, Gavin said, well, just imagine that there are no laws.
When you heard that, what ran through your head?
When I heard that, I was in total disbelief.
A source familiar with Kliger's work at the IRS denied he made those comments and denied that he ever sought access to protected taxpayer data. But Doge's actions prompted more than a dozen states to file a lawsuit against Musk and Doge.
No one elected Elon Musk and his minions, and no one has allowed him to have access to this information.
Erie Meyer says Doge also zeroed in on the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, demanding the highest level of power.
Doge insisted on God-tier access to the data at my agency.
How would you describe what God-tier view is?
God-tier means they're omniscient. They can see everything. Not only do I have questions about the financial conflicts of those people, I also am concerned about the security implications.
Were there complaints about Tesla that were accessed or deleted?
Yes. Tesla has a financing arm. Today, there are hundreds of complaints about Tesla in the CFPB systems. That database today is public. You can read people describing things like not being able to get a straight answer, not being able to get a fee taken off their account.
This is a heist. They're taking data out to help their organizations and not actually help consumers.
I think it's a heist of data for their own use, whether it's training AI or other purposes, data that no other company on earth has access to. Yes. I think it's a heist of cash. I also think it's a heist of market-moving information.
A White House official told CBS News Doge staff followed all agency rules and guidelines, and that the only interests being served in the Doge effort were those of the American people.
Regardless of what else happens with Doge, perhaps one of the most important features is that it started. It did not conclude, but it started a very important national conversation about what our government does. That conversation has been long overdue, and that sort of uncomfortable political debate, it becomes the source of regeneration.
They're laying off tens of thousands of people. They just revealed they're going to lay off 80,000 people at the VA.
These cuts are reckless. They're not targeted. They put America's health at risk. They put our economy at risk.
And they're only doing it so they could give tax cuts to the very, very, very rich.
As Musk himself acknowledged, the criticism of his efforts with Doge was almost immediately and overwhelmingly negative. So much so, many believe it drove him out of Washington.
Doge became the whooping boy for everything. So if there was some cut, real or imagined, everyone would blame Doge. I've had people think that somehow Doge is going to stop them from getting their Social Security check, which is completely untrue.
Although Musk has left, the consequences for his companies and his reputation remain. Tesla stock is still recovering from its decline.
Elon Musk has really hurt his own businesses. The impression of Elon and the public feelings about Tesla have really changed, and I think we've seen it explicitly in their sales numbers.
Falling sales were just the beginning of the drama for Musk. In early June 2025, tensions between the billionaire and the president flared over Trump's spending bill, which cut electric vehicle subsidies. Within days of their public clash, Musk reportedly made efforts to repair ties.
It really feels like what's happening right now across government is governments being made to really help businesses make more money, to help organizations and businesses that have contracts with the federal government have more money. It doesn't seem to be about actually helping people pay their bills, helping people get better benefits from the government, or help better healthcare from, if you're a veteran. That's not what this seems to be about. This seems to be about funneling more money into the pockets of large corporations.
When people say that America functions as an oligarchy, I always wonder if they would have this complaint if the people who they thought were shaping policy behind the scenes agreed with them. I suspect that in a lot of cases, the issue isn't that they think that some people have undue influence, but that they just disagree substantively with the policies that these people are implementing.
A Republican behind the scenes pulling strings, you're an oligarch. If you're a Democrat behind the scenes pulling strings, you're a humanitarian, a philanthropist who has the best interests of humanity in mind. So these are the games that we are playing today. And frankly, I'm a little surprised because they don't seem to be working.
I think you could argue pretty cogently that we're more oligarchy right now than democracy. And that's the problem. And as people wake up to that, that increases the probability that we'll flip back toward democracy.
I mean, certainly in American history, the solution for oligarchy has always been more democracy. We still value the notion of a free press in this country, and that is still an American value. So we have this system that is sort of really new in the world. Fundamentally, we have great wealth inequality, and people with more money than they know what to do with are able to put a great deal of that into government or avenues into the government to try to get more money. And that is a system that we have now.
The last time we went through this, from the 1890s to the 1920s, that sleeping giant did awaken, and we had huge reforms. Reforms of our politics. We got money out of politics. We changed our tax laws. We made sure that the rich paid a fair share of their income. We protected the public, food and drug laws, and antitrust laws that broke up the big concentrations of power.
I think a lot of people who normally would have nothing to do with each other and who would be in diametrical opposition politically are finding that they share a bedrock of belief. We're finding that when push comes to shove, we all love democracy in America.
What do you think, as someone who's a leader of a company, the influence of individuals like yourself on the federal government?
To me, government is a business. It's no differently than companies have a board of advisors or a board of directors. I can't think of a bigger business than the US economy. So to me, like, the more the merrier is the way I see it.
Where's the line from helpful partnerships between the business community, leaders, and the government to corruption and malfeasance?
I think there should be rules. I think they should be really spelled out. And I think everyone should understand before engaging in that, kind of help, that there's no conflict.
I think it's an open question how much power these tech leaders have. This is wealth creation, and it doesn't necessarily mean that there's political control. They're influential business leaders, and they do have the ear of this president. But, Trump is transactional, and if anyone's interests are close to his heart, they're his own. And so, it remains to be seen whether Mark Zuckerberg and the antitrust case against Facebook gets thrown out, or the antitrust case against Amazon. It remains to be seen if Elon's proximity to Trump during the first 100 days will translate into new contracts for SpaceX. It's not at all clear.